So again, my name's Nathan Wood. I'm the Executive Director of the Construction Progress Coalition, and we're going to be talking about the Common Data Exchange as sort of a framework and a model for looking at the supply and demand and really the economics of data in the AEC industry. I noticed there was a Slack channel that had quite a bit of conversation going on the topic of interoperability. So this should be topical for a lot of our hacks that we have going on here. So just a quick background on the Construction Progress Coalition, how we came together. Again, here in the US, I'm here in Denver, Colorado, formerly San Francisco, but our members are across the US, North America, and a few in the UK as well. But originally the Construction Open Standards Alliance here in the US had picked up and was shepherding the AEC XML standards that you can see covered a lot of different construction workflows, from payment applications to RFIs, and schedules and timesheets. That then joined forces with a group that I came from the construction side called the Construction PDF Coalition. We put together a standard guidelines for producing accurate drawing files in the PDF format that maintain as much of the data and inherent quality that came from either the CAD or the BIM solution that produced it. And again, you can download those on constructionprogress.org right now if you want to do any background or research on, you're working on one of these workflows and curious about what standards are out there. But I'll be the first to admit that they haven't, especially on the AEC XML side, haven't gained a ton of industry adoption. And really that is been showing, and we've been seeing a lot in our challenges, and what folks are talking about as far as what they're trying to solve is really this interoperability breakdown, this manually re-entering of data from application to application, and time spent using duplicate software because the architect has to use their tool and the contractor has to use their tool and the owner has to use their tool. And so we all have different platforms that need to talk to one another. And every time we're doing that duplicate entry, that's totaling at least $15.8 billion in waste. These are sort of more dated numbers that it's from all inclinations today. A lot of these challenges are not being solved at the project level. So how do we solve this supply and demand problem with interoperability? If we look at Lean, if we look at Agile, a lot of these newer mindset methodologies, it's really around this balance between respect for people and continuous improvement. So you're going to kind of see those two themes as we go through the CDX process, and how we're kind of massaging the needs for standardization as part of continuous improvement, but also respecting those people that actually need to provide or change for those standards, and making sure that their needs are being taken care of as well. So the CPC's vision at the end of the day really is around changing those performance benchmarks. Like, how do we measure success of a construction project in the digital age now that we have so much more data to pull from? It's not just safety modifiers and profit margins. There's a lot more detail we can get to that, but what should be those standard measurables so that we can start to benchmark that? That's CPC's vision. And then our mission is really around improving those construction outcomes and aligning those project insight demands. So looking at both the top-down needs of insights as well as the bottom-up interoperability needs is really where this common data exchange comes in. So I want to recognize, obviously Damon and the AEC Hackathon group, all the other events that we collaborate with, the technology partners, the industry partners. Again, this really is a collaborative effort that we all need to come together to promote open interoperability standards to solve these shared pains. But it starts with transparency and understanding what is really the problem at the end of the day that we're solving before we look at all the amazing technology out there that's available to solve it. And so again, just a reminder that if any questions are coming up from folks as you come in, do put those questions in the chat box. We're going to go ahead and move into the next section here, which is the digest section. So really looking at, again, supply and demand for those who skipped out on their microeconomics 101 in undergrad, would be looking for areas where we have very high demand for data, but of very little supply where we can go get that, or potentially very high supply, but potentially not very much demand. So as we look at construction industry, and this is again just sort of my opinion of where the imbalance comes from, is we have certainly a very high demand that we're seeing. It's very clear owners contractors, others on the executive side want the performance dashboards. They want predictive analytics. They want the AI. They want this, resource optimization, all these great things that I'm sure as technologists we're selling to them, and all these values. But really what we need, where we're missing that supply, is over here in this data supply. So, what are the easier forms that make it easier for the field to enter data, or uses of OCR or natural language processing. Robotic process automation is another one as well. Laser scanning and all the other image capture. Those that's really where the data comes from. And so even just reading through some of the Slack channels and hearing some of the different groups and what they're talking about, a lot of them are kind of really cool things that we can do once we have the data. But really trying to think about how are you getting the data, and how are you passing the data between one another, between these different stakeholders. That's really that kind of Monday through Friday challenge that Damon continues to talk about. So a term I want to introduce, WIIFM. If you haven't heard WIIFM before, we use it quite a bit in CPC. This is what's in it for me. And really, I described a little bit before about this, top-down versus bottom-up mentality for the supply and demand of data exchanges in AEC, and even just within a company. That at the top, you're going to have those that want the reliable outcomes. They want that stated empirical return on investment. Those at the very bottom are really just looking for something that's easier, that's going to help them get their job done and get out of the way, because they're probably not technology. Technology isn't the most important thing in their day, so they just want it to be easy and out of their way. And then as we work towards the middle, we get towards sort of this balance between the need for standardization, but also the need for, well, every project's different, so I need my way of customizing it. So again, just sort of those layers of the complexity that make AEC unique, and really where the opportunities are for technology to address these. So as we talk about interoperability, it's interesting to me. I've been using the term for 4 or 5 years now, probably, but I feel like in the last 2 years, it's become more commonplace within the AE&C industry. You hear owners talking about challenges with interoperability, and it's no longer you get that deer in headlights glazed eye look. That you actually get some head nods to like, oh yeah, interoperability. That's the problem. But really, what is interoperability? Interoperability is this, again, Venn diagram at the intersection of the application level container standards, containers, documents. Again, we'll talk about what those are between our different open source documents, and this is just a subset. I'm sure there's plenty more here, but PDF again has been ISO open standard since 2008, I believe. Obviously, IFC and BCF are ISO open. Even CSV files and just basic data structures that are open source. There's a lot we can do with that, and anymore there's a lot we can do with even the proprietary ones. Forge does allow access into Revit, and I always use the example that today I can still make a comment in a Google document and send it to someone as a Word document, and that same comment is able to come in and understand who I am and what I said and when I said it. So all those metadata fields are still passing, even though it's proprietary to proprietary. So, I think it's cool to see that there's examples of that. What we're really waiting for is those examples to happen between all of our AEC applications. And so part of what it really takes to do that is to have that project level process and data standards. So the combination of what's required in that original contract that you signed, what's included in those drawings and specifications that are tied to that, as we talked about in the specifications conversation, I guess yesterday or 2 days ago, that we've got if you're in the Europe or UK, the EIRs, the employer information requirements, has a ton of data requirements, same with our BIM execution plans, and then all the way down to at the more detailed level, these common data exchange CDX playbooks that we'll talk about in a little bit here, kind of make up, again, just a subset of the different standards that are needed at that project level. And then finally, we look at the industry level and those exchange standards. That's where Building Smart, that is produced, the IFC and the BCF, as well as CSI with their uniformat, master format, the different specification standards. COBE, if you're dealing with owner's information handover, is a great taxonomy standard that can be stored again within IFC or CSV or other formats. And then consensus docs is a great one if you haven't heard of on the contract side, as well as XBRL if you're ever dealing with financial exchange data. The kind of global standard for financial reporting is this XBRL taxonomy standard. So, all right, so that's a lot of stuff that we got to do to solve this problem. It's literally by definition a wicked problem. So as we get into this debate section, and hopefully we got some folks with some questions or thoughts on this, we can definitely bring into the conversation, you know, what is driving data standardization? It's really at this intersection between interoperability and insights. So again, the bottom-up interoperability needs and those top-down insights are two kind of opposing elephants that we need to tackle both of them if we're ever going to fix this, you know, standardization dilemma. And so, you know, how do we fix that is through this interoperability first approach, where it says, you know, if we focus on the person first, if we focus on that respect for the individual and that continuous improvement first, we'll get the data that will give us all those insights. And as the old adage goes with, you know, how do you tackle that elephant? It's, you know, one leg at a time. So that's where we have, you know, these different CDX initiatives that focus on different workflows, RFI or kind of the submittal to fabrication, change management process, as well as work in process, financial reporting, and the reality capture as our CDX number 4. So I'll just go through for an example here of what we're doing, or what we have done on the CDX1 RFI, and see how we can potentially use this language to talk about any of the challenges that, or hacks that you guys may possibly be working on. So, so looking at the RFI, as we look at the industry level exchange standards and what's available, again, going back to that AGC XML, there is existing data standards for, you can see there's 25 different data fields that constitute an RFI document or an RFI container. There is a predefined workflow that isn't exactly what it you know, would be necessarily on every project, but it's, you know, some sort of a baseline to go off of. And that's really where the CDX comes in to be able to help define the nuanced differences between how those workflows work, so that it ensures that whatever solution you're creating is potentially able to work in, you know, multiple different contract scenarios. But in order to get to that point of kind of understanding that current state and how we fix it, we have to get that common language of the different project level naming conventions, of, you know, the different stakeholder companies, because a oil and gas project is going to be, you know, very different from a hospital project as far as, you know, how many different stakeholders are involved in the design and construction. So we got to establish who those different stakeholders are. We've got to look at the different document itself, whether it's the RFI or what we're looking at in the different stages that RFI goes through. We got to look at all the different systems of record. You know, where is that RFI data being stored by each company? Because they've all got to have, you know, their legal retention for it. So understanding that network, and then who are those individual people, the personas that are doing those activities that put that data into those systems of record. You know, really breaking down and understanding and separating each of those different components is going to be really critical for us to both develop the current state and then improve that current state, and really create what is digital transformation, not just the digitization, which produces the data while creating waste. So here is where we'd look at, you know, the application level integration standards. This is a little dated now. It's from September of last year, but just an example here of different platforms, project management platforms that either an electrical contractor would be using or a general contractor, and what is that current interoperability capability, whether it's API driven or open file exchange driven. How much data are they able to share, and is it synchronized or not? You can see here kind of from the legend how we're trying to at least just, you know, create some transparency as far as what is available, and really encourage those that are not currently open and interoperable to become more open and interoperable, because that is, again, where the industry is moving towards. So I'll see, looks like I am just explaining this way too well, because I don't think we have any questions yet, which is fine. But moving forward into the decide section, just grab some water here. So how do we solve this? Oops, here we go. This common language of CX is a really important thing that I think will help us get ahead as far as getting on the same page, because we're still going to have a lot of different standards out in the industry. We're still going to have a lot of different technology, a lot of different preferences, and projects will continue to be bespoke. And so how do we adapt to that is by having a common language that helps us describe those nuanced differences. And so starting with really the importance of that document itself, and whether or not it's living in the analog format of paper or text messages, things that like you can't really get access to, that are manually driven and the data is instantly lost, versus digital, which is in some sort of a structure like a CSV or PDF or something that can be shared digitally, but again, is not connected to the cloud, is not in a live, real-time environment. It's a static document, versus that last graphic there for putting that gear around that document, that container, is what really unlocks the ability for cloud and API and all this digital transformation to happen. And a lot of what these hacks are based on sort of assumes that everybody is working in this cloud API environment, but really looking at where is it where in reality people are still in the analog world or in the kind of static digital world, but need to be into that cloud and API world. And so at the end of the day, what we end up being able to do is break down each of these exchanges that happen from one stakeholder to another, from a GC to an owner, from an architect to a GC or an owner, or down to a subcontractor. Each one of those exchanges is essentially a CDX scenario that includes the stakeholders and their systems of record. It includes the individual persona that's doing that activity. And again, if that's done automated by a computer, then the person wouldn't be there. It would be shown through one of those solid gears that it would be automated in the cloud. But ultimately, we're still creating those documents, we're still creating those records, those containers, and they still need to be exchanged between those two stakeholders. And so really breaking down the different types of points of exchange and where are you changing the current state process is really, it helps us as industry understand and communicate how is this technology changing my day-to-day work? How is it improving, my workflow, improving my process? And it really visualizes it and helps get everybody on the same page as far as what it is that we're doing. So at the point where we kind of understand at the macro level what those workflow exchanges are, now there's that selection process that says, okay, there's 25 data fields that make up an RFI, but which ones do I really care about in this specific scenario? You got to select those fields, identify what those are. That's, and again, another kind of API customization layer that there are a few players in the industry, Rivet and Avocados and even Procore Connect and others that are creating this, but we still need that ability for the project level to decide, these are the RFI data fields that I care about. So as we continue along here, the next step would be, okay, now that I know which data fields I want to connect, the reality is what I call something may not be exactly what you call something. And I think the expectation that this entire country or world or anyone would get on a truly universal common standard is going to be a while. So kind of in the meantime, or never. So how we would connect that is through those associations, through that data mapping that says, okay, you call it potato, I call it potato, but here's where we're creating that association, so that you do that once, and then you don't have to continue to do that every single time you write an RFI. It knows that logic of how to make those associations. But really that logic is already kind of getting into our next level, which is the transformations, and a transformation exchange really would look at things like statuses. So for those from industry that understand that an RFI goes through different statuses depending on if you're in the electrical contractors platform versus if you're in the general contractors platform versus if you're in the architect engineers platform, and the time that they have that is different. And so, what really is the measurement of how long did it take to get a response to an RFI? Well, it depends on if you're the general contractor or if you're the electrical contractor. And so if we're ever going to get to this world where we truly have standardized metrics for performance benchmarks and create the demand for submitting that sort of data, we need to have that consistent measurement of, how do we measure RFI return cycles and delays and other issues and root causes in a way that we can really run some structured analytics on it. It's a big challenge for the industry, but I think a fun one and a great one to spur some potential hacks. So this would be, again, more at like a macro level, the different exchanges. Again, that would happen, the key fields, and actually sort of a theoretical potential real world example of, the use case for a Procore to Procore or Procore Connect integration that, again, they have their own challenge with using their APIs. So I personally am not a coder at all, but I was able to go into their API documentation and see, what data fields they use, map them up to the 25 data fields from the AEC XML, and then actually see which of those are actually being transferred using this Procore Connect, and is that the right amount of data fields, or should it be more, or should it be less? And so, it's really cool kind of what you can do just by exploring around, but really understanding, who is that stakeholder that you're capturing or exchanging this data for, and do they want to share it, and how much of it do they want to share? That's really important to create sort of that requirement structure for a lot of these integrations that we're gonna have to build in this industry. All right, good. I'm glad Jeffrey piped in. I knew I said something wrong. Let me figure out how to let you talk. So Jeffrey Let's here with representing Building Smart, and so I'm sure I said something wrong. You want to go back?
No. It's not wrong, and I think this sort of goes back to one of the things I said in my presentation, and something that we always continue to talk about, and that is when we talk about standards. I think one of the most frustrating thing that everybody has, everybody faces, is that when is a standard really a standard? What is the domain or reach of a particular organization's standard? And it's as much about authority or provenance as it is about then adoption and implementation. So the work that CPC is doing in specifying this idea of a CDX, then the question becomes, okay, so then how does this live, or does it live outside of CDX? And then does it live throughout the United States? And does it live outside of the United States? And then how does it connect to other standards efforts that might be at the ISO level, or even nationally? We look at the ANSI or ASTM, or whatever we think are the appropriate sort of national standards libraries for these things. And I think part of that goes back to the struggle that we have here particularly in the United States, and which is, well, where do we get our standards from, and what do we adhere to? I think when you look at Europe, it's a little bit clearer, because with Europe, they know that at each level they have the country things. So with Britain, there's the BSI, the British Standards Institute. But then at the European levels, there's CEN. And CEN really sets the bar and has agreements with all these other countries that say, if it's a CEN standard, it becomes a country standard. And then it goes up even to the ISO level. It says, well, if it's a CEN standard, then we'll submit it and it'll be an ISO standard, and vice versa. And I think for a lot of business processes, a lot of industries, ISO matters. And it seems like that's one of the biggest things we struggle with in our industry in the United States is, well, why don't these international efforts and international standards matter? And I don't necessarily have the answer to that. I think I'm always asking the question is how does this relate to what may be happening at an international understanding or international level, so that we're not constantly trying to reinvent the wheel in each country or in each market or whatever.
Well, and I don't know if you were on, Jeffrey, when I was going through this slide, but it's almost like, because, for example, a lot of the UK efforts kind of started at this very process and very specific, and kind of moved
Yep,
their way up into the ISO level exchange, right? And it's like,
right,
what is the right direction for standards to
exactly.
flow? Should it be from here to here, or should it be from here to here? And either way, yeah, there's a trade-off of what things need to be standardized at the. It's just like, why doesn't everybody follow the same currency, or even Bitcoin in general? Like, that whole concept is
Yeah,
absolutely challenging this whole notion, and this is just our version of it.
yeah, yeah. And so, I guess what part of what I'm getting at is how can we then take the work that CPC has done with CDX and say apply it at the next level, the next level, the next level, so that it may be adjusted, or it may have some sort of, I wouldn't say watered down. I think I keep always going back to this term of best common denominator, right? That it can apply to every industry, well, every building market industry, um, and have that sort of authority and provenance. Um, and I think that helps. But I think that the thing I struggle with, and I know you struggle with, is, well, we understand interoperability, we understand the needs for standards for interoperability, but how the hell do we get, you know, John Doe, who's sitting in a seat in, building company X, or, design company Y, to understand those values and actually adopt them?
Yeah, hearing you say that, I go back to the analogy of, like, what got all of our parents to use Facebook, right? Like, is it there was no reason to do it in the beginning, but it got easier and easier and more appealing, and kind of grew. And
Yeah,
that's where I think a lot of this, as we get into the deliver part of it, like, really what
yeah,
we're saying, and really where CPC wants to sit is in partnership, right? Like, we know
yeah,
we're not anywhere near ready with the standards, everything ISO's doing, but we've got some cool ideas on different things that we can try to kind of be that
exactly.
agitator in partnership, right?
Yeah,
To work together with them, so that, and I'll flip through these early ones real quickly, and we'll get back into that stuff, because in reality, like, people have been banging their heads on this for 10 years now, trying to
yeah,
solve this problem of interoperability. We've got all this money from VC coming in. We've got all these technology solutions. I was actually just doing some research earlier, and of course we didn't have time to create this as a poll. This would have been a fun poll to do, but you may have heard that both PlanGrid and Building Connected were recently acquired by Autodesk. Both PlanGrid for 875 million, Building Connected for 275 million. So if there's a reason to get into construction technology, there it
mm-hmm,
is right there, right? But, like, part of kind of the underlying, and, like, my understanding of this, and I'm sure Jeff, you know a lot of these same folks as well, but, Tracy Young on the PlanGrid side, Dustin Devan on the Building Connected side, as founders, both actually, this was ironic. I looked up on LinkedIn, worked exactly the same amount of time from the exact same months, like 4 years and 3 months, whatever, at Rudolph and Sludden out in the Bay Area, in the field, doing that work, empathizing with those folks that were struggling with whatever they were doing. And that led them to create the software that it is today.
mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't some fancy new tech that came out that they jumped to. Well, with Tracy, it was the iPad. And with Dustin, it was, really just cloud estimating and cloud bid exchanges. But, being able to really have a deep understanding of the problem is what made them successful. And so that's really kind of the point of this, is that, by truly understanding what that problem is, going through that design thinking. If you're not familiar with the D School, definitely spend some time on their website at Stanford on these 5 steps of the design thinking process. But by going through that, empathizing with the different stakeholders that need to exchange the data, understanding where those pain points are and why they exist, will let us then define in a much more clear and streamlined way, what is that exchange breakdown, and do sort of the CDX definition in stage 2. So then we can go through this ideate stage. I'll show you in a second here what an anchors to rockets looks like, and create that shared challenge statement, so that when you go off and prototype, because again, these hackathons, now that it's 2 weeks long, you can spend a little bit more time really understanding what is that problem, and getting through those 3 stages before truly diving into prototyping your hack. So that when you're out there, showing to the judges, I know, most of them, anyone coming from industry, if it looks like you just took, test data that nobody would ever really be able to get and did some cool visualization on it, that's not going to wow anyone's socks. It's got to be something that's really getting at the heart of solving this interoperability problem that we're having. Jeff, anything you want to add there?
No, keep going, man.
Okay. So the anchors to rockets, which again, it'll be fun to figure out how to do these with social distancing in mind now. But the idea behind, once we've got those different stakeholders, we understand whether it's a pay application or an RFI exchange or a BIM handoff, across the supply chain, what is that problem that all these folks are looking to come together, and starting with that current state, everybody writing down, what are the insights, data, or that interoperability pain points that are occurring today, really who are the people that are impacted by that, and then understanding the anchors that are keeping those in place. What are the root causes? Who are the influencers? Is it contract? Is it culture? Is it timing? Is it whatever that's creating it, that's keeping it in its place? So then that lets us kind of shift our gears into that future state of, okay, now what are those ideal state conditions? Who benefits from that, and how are they benefiting? And then that finally leads us to the rockets, which is, it's always kind of an interesting debate between, the technology and the process change, and which one is the rocket and which one is the future state. And oftentimes it really depends on the scenario of, do you want to achieve this future state? And is it the process change that's going to get you there? Or is it the technology that gets you there? And usually it's, that the future state is the technology and the process gets you there, but not every time. But just going through that exercise of, again, separating those four, really help you put together a high quality challenge statement. Because those that have ever done hackathons with Google or Facebook, or any of these folks that do hackathons or do agile workshops, they often use these "how might we" statements. And so I learned these from another agile workshop in Silicon Valley, that starts with creating a challenge sentence around, how might we improve whatever that current state shared pain is. So whatever that opportunity that you're looking to capture or change is the how might we. The in ways that is looking at gathering from that anchor that you wrote, and then unlocking the rockets that you found, whether it's the process change or the technology. But really looking at in that that statement, is where you want to capture what is that long-term goal, what is kind of the audaciousness that you're trying to achieve from this, because it really allows you to both focus on the micro challenge of the stakeholders and the interoperability and what's going back and forth, that also allows you to get everyone to align on the same goal at the end of the day. So ways of, especially, we even toyed around with potentially making this how you would submit your idea, because it really forced you to break down the different components of what makes a good challenge. Because it's not just, I want to do something with AI. It's like, okay, I want to use AI in order to fix this problem that this person is facing, so that ultimately all these other people get this value of this larger data. Structuring challenges that way is a really great way to frame and really solidify your team on the hack that you're going to do. So I think I saw a question come in. Let me figure out where, there it is. I am just gonna allow you to talk, Peter, if you can. Let me find you. Do you wanna, I'll read it here, but do you wanna ask your question and introduce yourself real quick, if you can talk? And if not, I'll just read it here. There you are.
Okay, so I have a question about, so we have different stakeholders which have different systems, and they have just their own environment of internal exchange, of course, and storing, and sometimes it just goes in so different way from one stakeholder to another. And should they really follow one way? Is it possible to, of course, would be the best to follow just one way, to have only almost no problems from project to project.
But I think, what we've learned is that's unrealistic, right? That won't happen. So so what we're saying is that we should have one way of communicating it, like having one universal language. We all speak many different languages, but yet we're all speaking English here, right? And so I think what we're talking about is the language, not necessarily the standard. And really the term I didn't bring up was iconography. I was looking up is really at the end of the day, what we're doing here, like in this lucid chart, is trying to take as many of the words out of it and creating more visual associations with how are we either replicating or changing the analog process that we used to do so that we see what the technology is doing for us. Because if you're not the one building the technology and you're just handing it over, there's that separation where they're not fully understanding, or we're not sure if we're even on the same page around really what that workflow is. And really this isn't that different than probably what some really basic, Visio using kind of more of our standard terms. And we try and replicate those same standard terms as much as possible, but really giving it more of an AEC kind of construction feel to it. And especially when it comes to APIs, that is sort of the gear is the universal API indicator, but really what we're talking about is structured data. And so the standard can be ISO, BSI, you name the standard. It's more of a who's communicating what standard to whom in what format.
Yeah. But let's say one company doesn't. Of course, there are ways to connect. The way to connect actors together mainly are because of the contract, main contract or turnkey contract. And let's say one company doesn't have this maturity level to really get into it. So how would they proceed? They would understand, of course, standards, but implementation would take some time for this.
Yeah, and that is where really the industry disruption happens, because you're right, that would be the barrier to that. And so the solution to that would be an owner that recognizes that if this is something that they want to do, they have to create contractual requirements that only allow in bidders that meet these minimum technical requirements. And that's how you get around that, in my opinion. Easier said than done, but that's the solution. Mm-hmm. Jeff, do you agree? Do you have any other ideas?
No.
Yeah. I mean,
it's not easy, but I think, it's because, and we can excuse this stuff away all day long. And really, like, the answer back to that would be use this as a tool to communicate how broken that process is, and keep communicating up and showing those people the waste that they're creating, if they truly are. Or maybe we realize that, again, there just isn't that much supply and demand for that problem that we seemingly are having. And maybe it's just something that we need to charge more money or figure out other, workarounds. Because a lot of what we talk about when it comes to interoperability is interoperability can be either a barrier or a roadblock, or I guess lack of interoperability. So a barrier being probably a person or a process that's in the way that you can kind of go up and try and have that conversation with them, and they may block you, and they stop it, and they may turn that into a roadblock. And in which case, a roadblock, if you literally think about a rock on the road, you have to go around it. So it won't be the most efficient way, but you can figure out ways to kind of do workarounds. So that's where, again, by visually creating these workflows and where the inefficiencies lie, we may come up with more creative solutions that are able to avoid roadblocks, but take down some of these barriers and create more interoperability efficiency and also data reporting transparency.
And I think what Nathan tries to emphasize, what I try to emphasize, both of us from our, we're essentially trying to do the same things in the same overall larger realm, but in sort of different subsets, is we both want to have our peers understand the value of engaging each other at these levels of standardization, whether it's at the CPC level or it's at the building smart level, and understand that involvement, that direct involvement by all the stakeholders to say, we have a problem, now can we talk about what that problem is and how to fix it, and get to this level of mapping out the process and what are all the things that is necessary in order to solve any of these problems. As much as I appreciate people doing these hackathons and saying, hey, I have this idea, and running with it and creating a solution, the question I always get back to, and I think, you know, this applies as well to the work of CPC, especially around CDX, is like, but is it a solution if only one person's using it or two people are using it? The solutions really come when you see a broader adoption. And to get that broader adoption, we need to have agreements, consensus on what the problem is, and then how to best solve it. And, you know, I think this is showing the perfect example of a process that says, well, here's how we identify the issues, and then here's how we agree that this is what the issue is and how the potential for fixing it is. And then those fixes are either process fixes and or technology fixes, right? Because I think this is the other thing that I tried to get at on Monday was, sometimes we think the problem is a technical problem when really it's a process problem. It's an interaction. It's something that we're doing poorly on the business side or in that, you know, design process or whatever it is, the business process side. So how do you fix that? How do you hack that and say, okay, well, you know, how can we avoid this problem? Well, maybe we should be doing it a different way, and then see how the technology can enable those changes or solving those problems.
And I think that's a good point. And actually, to Ricardo's comment here as well about making these less ambitious, I think the point of this is to understand at a macro level what you're changing in this very delicate ecosystem. So yeah, our hack may only focus on just making one, you know, analog exchange into a digital exchange, and it might be very, very small. Or it might be looking at, hey, I actually think I can get rid of all these different things here by just doing this one thing here. So yeah, don't think that in a hack you're going to solve all of these problems, but understanding where your hack fits within the larger picture is absolutely what makes it a good hack, and helps you kind of filter out the distractions of, oh, but we could do this, oh, but we could do that. Well, hey, does it fit within the framework of what we're focused on? You know, it actually does help you create something that is less ambitious. So very good point, Ricardo.
Yeah, and then the question becomes is, when does a hack become a standard? Like, how do you go from hack to, oh, everybody realizes that this is really the way it should be done, and how do we change that perception and utility of it from hack to standardized process?
I think it's also the experience. Like, let's say you create the hack for this like middle area, let's say, and it's working well. So you just present in, let's say, in the next AEC presentation that in the next year, so more people will get know it, and just by the success, and you can actually get the you just create the standard. Maybe it can happen naturally, maybe you can force it a little bit, but also what I agree that each IT implementation should just like should be coherent with this whole ecosystem, which should fit, so it doesn't disrupt any kind of the process before and after.
or
context
at least,
is everything.
Yeah, it may have to disrupt, but like being cognizant of what is being disrupted. Because I mean, it's the analogy of, you know, Airbnb didn't necessarily go after Marriott hotels, even though they end up having, you know, more rentable rooms per night than they did. But you know, recognizing a little bit of there is going to be some disruption, and there should be some disruption, but like cognizant to how your business model approaches it. I mean, any VC that's looking at B2B software understands that that's a paramount, you know, like you're dead in the water if you're not thinking about that. So, you know, if your goal is for this hack to turn into anything, you know, certainly start small, but definitely have an ambitious goal for where you want it to go.
Yeah, and even with that, just understanding the bigger context, right? And I think that's where the value of, you know, formalizing the things that CPC uncovers to create these CDX standards is to say, okay, how does this fit in the bigger picture of, you know, executing projects or designing projects, or, you know, and And I mean, we try to do that at the building smart levels, say, well, what does this look like from the 10,000-foot view for the entire life cycle of, for example, building energy modeling, right? Now, at that point in time, that particular point in time, I'm not going to solve all the problems for building energy modeling from, you know, design to operations, but I have enough understanding and knowledge of the entire life cycle to say, well, I think there's like 8 different points in which building energy modeling becomes important to the process. So then I'm going to narrow it down and say, okay, well, which part of the process which one of those 8 do I want to focus on? And then even within that 1/8 of the process, say, okay, well, maybe there's a couple things I can work on, like, you know, improving GBXML, or maybe an alternative, or, you know, whatever. And that in itself, that project, that hack, still has an understanding of the greater context in which it can have an impact on. And then, like I said, begin to develop these things like, you know, standards and, you know, agreed processes and agreed transactions.
Well, and I think similar to the concept of, you know, low code, no code, I think what our audacious vision is that, yeah, like contracts and interoperability standards would be able to be dynamically kind of created, you know, with all those different team members together. That would be the ultimate lean, continuous improvement and respect for the individual. Again, we may be far off from that, but that doesn't mean we can't be building the foundation for it. Just like blockchain is building the foundation for a lot of things that aren't quite ready yet in the industry, but it doesn't mean people aren't still moving forward with the technology itself. So we've got about, I think, a little bit more than 10 minutes left. I just had the rest of this time to talk about potentially if anyone on the call has a hack that they're working on, that they want to talk, and kind of like really honing in on what is that industry challenge, what is that shared pain that it is addressing. If we don't have anyone that wants to share, I pulled some ones that I just saw from the Slack channel that we can talk about as a group. But I will see if anyone wants to either, I guess you can raise your hand or you can use the chat or use the Q&A if you want to talk about either your idea or your challenge. And if not, I will just dive into the first one that I had. Very cool. So I saw this one here. An interesting idea about a safety cell phone notification, sort of an Amber Alert, which would load emergency info for whatever building you have. So I think for this one is a great one, and really looking at the supply chain of data and how would you and where would you get that information about what doors are emergency exit doors versus normal exit doors versus whatever. And again, that stuff is inherently within Revit, but actually, you know, checking for it and where it comes from and who's providing it. And then the notifications, I think, stuff as well. Again, like what platform would that person typically be in that they would get the notification? Because they're probably not going to have a whole brand new app just to receive that notification. They're probably going to want to see it in whatever they're typically using. So that's where, again, APIs come in to help deliver some of those notifications to the appropriate person. So really mapping out kind of the whole safety data compiling process, as well as, you know, how it's distributed out, I think would help really uncover where the challenges lie and where those opportunities are to make this a reality.
So this is a good example. This would be a good example of researching what OGC, the Open Spatial Consortium, Open Geospatial Consortium, may have some guidance or standards on this very thing.
Exactly.
You know, it goes back to the, you know, the point earlier is seeing what else is out there. You may not have to reinvent even the core technology of this. There might already be some guidance on this already. So I would check the OGC. I think it's opengeospatial.org.
Awesome. Do we need to wrap up right now, or we do have Jose's can share his if we have 5 minutes?
We really need to wrap up right now.
Okay.
But what I would say though is that we can spin this up, you know, in and take this at least in a different spot if folks want to continue the engagement. We just have, yeah.
I get it. You have more important people that need the Zoom webinar.
We don't know. We just only have one Zoom. And ouch! Everyone is equally as important, Nathan, especially.
Got to give everybody a chance to transition.
Awesome. All right. Well, definitely hit me up on Slack if you have any questions or want any advice on your ideas. Oops. I also shared, I know Jeffrey shared some great links to some building smart stuff that's also on Slack, but put that here. So thanks, Damon. Thanks, everyone.